Hi, everyone. Reverend Leo Yates here. I have the distinct pleasure of hosting this conversation with these first class of deacons from 1997. With us is Reverend Lee Farrell, Reverend Marjorie
Camel.
Shamel, uh, Reverend Richard Buckingham, and Reverend Lynn Knowlton. Thank you all so very much for being with us and being willing to share your experience, and hopefully we can gain some advice from you as well. The first question I would love to ask you is, if you wouldn't mind, and we'll start with Reverend Lee, share a little bit of your background, maybe a moment or so of your background to prior to becoming a deacon. Where were you? Were you in school, or what was going on in your life at the time?
I came straight from seminary to Severna Park United Methodist, and I was consecrated a lay worker, is what they called it way back then. Um, and then that moved me from that to diaconal, and then diaconal to deacon,
Wow.
and I'm still there.
At the church, Severna
Yeah.
Park. That's amazing. And Marjorie, Reverend Marjorie, where were you prior to being ordained?
I was a local pastor as I was finishing up my college in northern Pennsylvania. And after seminary, I started working in Maryland, became a diaconal minister, and then moved to deacon while I was still serving that same church. I've served in another church since then, and now I am pursuing chaplaincy.
Awesome. Awesome. That's definitely deacon's work too.
Yeah.
And what about you, Reverend Rick? Where were you prior to your little bit of your background prior to being ordained?
Well, after college, I was asked to start a part-time job as a youth minister. And I found that I really enjoyed that. Not all experiences were tremendously positive, but I stuck with it. And after about 10 years, decided to go to seminary and became a diaconal minister in 1983 when my seminary degree was done. So I was a diaconal minister for 14 years before ordination as a deacon became available. And at that point, I can talk a little bit more about that later, but that was my background. Diaconal minister, primarily doing youth ministry, but also Christian education.
Oh, and Christian education as well. Awesome. And what about you, Reverend Lynn? A little bit about your background.
Well, I went to college, but there was a big gap. I got married. I had 3 children, and while my children were young, I was very active at a local church and was encouraged to go to seminary. And the pastor wanted me, of course, at the time, it was only the elder track, and that wasn't going to work. So I then went into diaconal ministry, and I was in that as a Christian educator for 4 years before the deacon ministry became available.
Wow. Okay. So I see some diversity from local pastor to diaconal ministers prior to being ordained.
Right.
I would love to hear from each of you for what was it like being in that first class of deacons? And how did you learn about being a deacon? Was it through DCOM or the Board of Ordained Ministry? Reverend Lee, would you start?
I have no idea. I guess it was from Board of Ordained Ministry. I just remember loving these guys. Our whole class was just great people, and we all got along really well as other Christian educators who. The big thing was, do we make the shift or not? Do you stay diaconal? And I remember weighing all those factors on, and we talked amongst ourselves a bit, and I don't know if this is the place to say, but I remember we went to West River and we were put in small groups to answer questions. Do you guys remember that?
Yes.
Vaguely.
it was scary. And I think now that I'm on Boom and I hear candidates, I think I didn't know anything compared with what these guys know. I mean, they are, I could never answer all those questions now. But it was, so it was a little bit scary for me. And I was just praying that I was making the right choice to go deacon and not stay in the diaconal track.
It's a lifetime commitment. I understand.
Mhm.
What about you, Reverend Marjorie?
It was a huge decision. There are a lot of benefits to being a layperson who's modeling ministry for other laity. So it was a big decision to make. I found out about it. I guess it was just new. It was big news after that general conference that there were now 2 orders, and then it was sort of offered that diaconals could become deacons. So I don't know a specific person or anything that might have told me that. I think it was just general information from general conference. I found it confusing, the whole process of becoming a deacon, and then at the very beginning of being a deacon, I don't know that anybody really understood what the order was, what we were going to do, how to become a deacon if you weren't already a diaconal. The whole thing was very ambiguous. And so for me, it was sort of a just feeling out what the role would be. And I'll be honest, at the time, my day-to-day work in the ministry didn't change. I was just pretty much doing the same as I already had been doing.
Mhm.
I'm sure they had a lot to flesh out in the beginning.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's building the plane while you're flying. And maybe I hate to compare it to that, but
No, that's what it was.
I think it's come obviously for those of us who've been in ministry now, they have fleshed out a good portion of it.
Mhm.
So, what about you, Reverend Rick?
As a diaconal minister, I found myself wanting to learn more about what it meant to be in diaconal ministry. So I took advantage of any opportunity I had to do that. And one of those opportunities was the World Diaconia Assembly. It was held in Nova Scotia in 1991 or 2. And so I just decided to attend unofficially as an observer. And in the midst of these deacons and diaconal ministers from other denominations, really from all over the world, I began to get a much better sense of what diaconia was, how it was perceived in other denominations where it had been around for a long time. And it really was a wake-up call to me that there was much more to diaconia than just the little, the job that I was doing. And that became a challenge for me as a diaconal minister. Was I really fulfilling the diaconal call that I had received? So when the opportunity for ordination came along, I was in a quandary. I'll pick up on what Marjorie said. I was very proud to be a layperson in ministry, and saw myself as an example for laity. I think that a strong laity in many ways are more important than clergy, because as Bishop Yekel used to tell clergy, I'm your bishop, but I'm also bishop of the laity, and they greatly outnumber you.
That's so true.
I know, yeah.
Sounds like
So anyway, I felt that the ordination as a deacon would better allow me to fulfill the call in greater aspects than was the case before.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Reverend Lynn?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. First of all, being a part of the diaconal ministry and knowing people in ministry I never looked at myself as a layperson or a clergy person. I was just active, in ministry. However, I was asked sometime after I was consecrated diaconal minister to participate in the board of diaconal ministry, which was separate at the time from the board of ordained ministry, although we met once a year all together. So I got to know a lot of people across the conference. And during that time, especially being on the board, we were getting a lot of news first about deacons and the questions, and meeting with other deacons across the country. I know many of us went to different conferences, and I know there was one that Bishop Yeakel led. Did you go to that one? I can't remember who all was there, but he was like the consulting bishop for those people who had questions about becoming a deacon, going from diaconal ministry. And the questions that were raised right here were huge. I mean, that was a big, big decision to make at the time. So I was lucky, I think, to be part of that beginning. And as I became ordained, because I was already on the board of diaconal ministry, I was then grandfathered into the board of ordained ministry, and I served on that for quite a while. And that was really interesting because Patty Smith-Fensky and I were both on at the same time. And we were the voice of deacons and the interpreters of what that meant. And that, talk about scary, you know, and speaking up to some of the people that, well, what do you mean you want to be a deacon? Why don't you want to be an elder?
Yeah.
Are you just, you know, and it was a threat. People, I have to say, most elders were threatened by the whole idea of it after that general conference.
And even after that, when I came through, they were like, what do you mean you want to be a deacon?
I know, yeah. So, but anyway, it was a wonderful journey. Met a lot of nice people.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. The next question I wanted to ask each of you is, what would you, if you don't mind sharing, what's one challenge you've experienced? I'm sure there's many, but what's one challenge you've experienced as a deacon? Reverend Lee?
I guess the only one I can think of is the obvious, and that is general misunderstanding of who we are and what we're committed to doing, what our call was. I feel like at times, if they need me, I'm important, I'm great, and if they don't, I'm not. So the word deacon is thrown around when they need something, they need the title or they need the person, and after that, it hasn't always been. And so it's been a struggle all along for us to have the credibility or that we could have. I just remember when we were brought forward, I think it was the year that we were actually ordained. And one of the elders who was in counseling decided he wanted to move to deacon because that to him was his call.
Yeah.
And when he came onto the floor of conference, he got a few boos, and Bishop May went crazy and made it quite clear. Bishop May was always in our court. In fact, he took us out that annual conference and we fed people on the streets of DC.
Right.
That sounds like
him. That was indicative of just the struggle. That's the only problem I've actually encountered.
Thank you for that. Reverend Marjorie?
Mine is very similar. People not quite understanding. I've had a lot of congregation members through the years ask me when I'm going to be getting my own church. I wish that I could get my own church, and they don't understand. And even after I explain, they just don't quite get it. But that's just sort of a question. I think the challenge has been the perception of hierarchy, that our order is somehow less than the order of elders. And I have found that not only in congregation members, but unfortunately, some of my colleagues who are elders have that same kind of perception. I have had colleagues who are elders saying they wish that everyone could be ordained. They miss the two-step ordination process, I believe, and that they wish everybody could be ordained as a deacon and then either stay a deacon or go forward to become an elder. And of course, intrinsic is that hierarchical, that somehow elder is more. So that's been a challenge, just to be recognized. I know some of the language, even in, unfortunately, even some documents or PowerPoints and so on that I've seen coming from conference, the language implies that kind of hierarchy, talking about pastors as though that is all clergy, or that's just one example that sometimes that that less than implication is there, and it continues to today.
Thank you for that. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Reverend Rick, what's one challenge you've experienced as a deacon?
Well, in addition to what everyone has said thus far, when I looked at the language that was used to describe the diaconal role, some of the words were that the deacon should be connecting the gifts of the congregation to the needs of the world. And that was a challenge for me. How do you do that when you're working in a local congregation in Christian ed and youth ministry? You know, you're kind of cocooned in that setting. And if you're not really employed to be in full-time mission or working in the world, how do you do that in the world? How do you be in the world? And how do you bring the congregation into the world? Well, you do it through mission trips and education and any way you can think of. But that was a big challenge for me the whole time. I think I generally succeeded, but there's a little piece of me that wonders if I could have done more.
That's a good one. Thank you for that. And what about you, Reverend Lynn?
I agree with everything so far, and I had two challenges. One was immediately after ordination, people started calling me Reverend, and I didn't know who they were talking to. You know, it was a mind thing, and there was more what I would call respect from laity. Interestingly, at least the church I was serving, that's what I found. And in the church I was serving, a pastor, after I was ordained, a pastor left and a new pastor came in, and I have to say that person didn't have a high regard for himself or others. Therefore, when I was telling him about a visit that I made to one of my Sunday school teachers in the hospital and calling it a ministry, he said, "That's not ministry. You're just going as a friend." And I thought, okay, that's the end of this place. You know, he did not respect not just the order of deacon and who we were, and it had been a few years at that point, but he didn't respect me. And people looked at me and wanted me to come to the hospital to visit. So of course, what do? You go. That's just what we do.
He sounds old school.
Step in where you're asked to be, and I think that's a blessing and an honor, and to be part of the holy moments of people's lives, you know, weddings and funerals. It sounds terrible to say that I like them, but you know, I know all of us have participated or led those, and I think it's important.
Amen. A big amen. We're the
Leo,
representing Christ.
there's just one little thing is how many times I had to explain that we weren't diagonal. And then when we got ordained and our stoles were diagonal, they couldn't get that.
Had to really lean into that one.
Yeah.
That's a good one too. I have a story I'll share offline. So let's just go to the last question. And what's one piece of advice each of you would give to persons exploring deacon's orders? One piece of advice. Reverend Lee?
Well, all I could think of was for persons who are considering it to really spend a long time in discernment. It doesn't just happen, and you have to spend a lot of time thinking about that call and where it came from and who's encouraged you and what your gifts are, and just really in prayer and discernment about if this is indeed what you're called to do in the world. Yeah, that's
Discernment,
simply
that's a
put.
good one. Thank you. Reverend Marjorie.
I'm going to start with the same. I jotted a couple things down, and the first is, yes, spend a lot of time in prayer and reflection before you even approach your pastor or a DS, but continue in prayer and reflection throughout that whole process, so that you are sure you can articulate your call. And as Rick mentioned, that bridging of the world and the church, be able to clearly talk about that when you go to the district committee. Even the best decom out there, the best intentions they have, they just tend to have that bias toward elder. So you need to be very clear about who you are and what your call is when you are in the midst of your process. Kind of stand your ground.
You are a shining light in my decom. I remember looking to you quite often. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Reverend Rick, piece of advice.
In addition to what has been said, I would add, connect with other deacons and other people in diaconia, whether in United Methodist Church or in other churches, and stay connected, because we teach each other, we learn from each other, and I think it's important for deacons to feel that we are part of a community and not simply individuals who have followed an individual call, which is true. We are also a community, and we have strength when we acknowledge our communal call and relationships. So that I would add that.
Amen. Reverend Lynn?
I agree with all of that. And I know even in retirement, I'm on the decom here, and I agree with what Marjorie said, but I also think that we have a voice as ordained deacons to really translate what a deacon is. And I'm very proud of the decom that I'm on, because there was another deacon on it before me, so that was helpful. But I think just being able to voice the ministry is good. It helps not just the candidate coming in, but also the people there, the laity and the elders. Also, I think asking good questions, deacon questions. So to me, a candidate coming through for deacon ministry needs to be asked a couple of questions and that really pertain to that, but also flipping it and saying, you know, well, I've often heard elders say to a deacon, well, why do you want to be an ordained deacon if you can do exactly what you're doing without being ordained? And my answer to that question is, when an elder candidate comes in, why do you want to be an elder candidate when you can be a lay speaker or something else? You know, let's not just divide it into specialties and know the difference. I think we have to know the the difference between the ministry of the deacon and the ministry of the elder, and if you put them side by side, which I have done because of being on the board, there's pretty much all the same background and mission and ministry, with the exception of the sacraments. You know, really, when you look down at it in black and white. So I think we need to be a better voice across the board, candidates as well as every deacon. We have to be able to really speak to the deacon ministry. Like, oh, that sounds like being a deacon.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. It's always educate, educate, educate.
Yep.
Wherever we can. I was in an interview the other day, and I have to throw in deacon so
Yeah.
people don't make the natural assumption that I'm an elder. So thank you all very much for your time, and thank you for your courage to be a part of that first class of deacons. I mean, I would been nervous too, hearing some of your responses, trying to consider making that leap to being an ordained clergy person. But you all really paved the way for many of us, me included, for our annual conference, and just for being in leadership, as you all have described, and also as role models. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I, the Lord of sea and sky, I have heard my people cry, all who dwell in dark and sin, my hand will save. I who made the stars of night, I will make their darkness bright. Who will bear my light to them? Whom shall I send?